Hi everyone, my name is Cabra, my pronoun is they. Welcome to Steel City Witch, my YouTube channel where usually I talk about stuff that I have done a lot of research on. Today, as a break for myself and a bit of a treat, I'm going to start talking about a subject that I have done no research on, which is kitchen witchcraft. Kitchen witchcraft is a form of witchcraft that I've been doing since before I even knew what witchcraft was. Just because my family has a very deep connection to food and we've been blessed to have really good relationship with it. So I just kind of wanted to go over some concepts that I use in my kitchen witchcraft in hopes that it will inspire you to give it a shot, right? I don't expect anyone to do it the way that I do it, but I am hoping that people will give it a shot. So before we get started, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a dietitian, I'm not any kind of medical professional. Everything in this presentation is my personal spiritual beliefs. I do try and be responsive to science, but please don't confuse that for actual medical advice. If you have a medical problem, please try to gain access to a medical practitioner. If you don't have access to a medical practitioner, I'm sorry, this video cannot help you, and I wish you the best of luck on your journey. So with that out of the way, I want to be really honest that these two books affected the way that I think about food really deeply. I'm going to be honest, they are a little problematic. There's issues of class and race in there that I think don't go very well addressed, but I think that despite having problems and not necessarily being very critical of systems of oppression, they do have a couple of really good ideas. So if you're interested in some of the way that I feel about food and some of the things that I try to live by nutritionally, this is where I really resonated. So just to be honest about where I'm coming from. So one of the things that happens in magic is this idea that there are fundamental forces in the universe. And usually you divide the universe up into discrete boxes, less than some 3, 4, 5, 7, 10, 13, right? I've seen a bunch of different ways to do it. The goal is not to be able to categorize the entire universe into a discrete number of boxes. Reality is way too weird for that. It's to kind of get enough of a model of how the universe works most of the time so that you can think through problem solving, right? Every problem solving model has its benefits and limitations, but sometimes you just got to pick one and work with it. So there's 3 principles that go behind the concept of fundamental forces, and I want to go over them in this video. The first is the principle of completion, the idea that whatever the fundamental forces are in your universe, you should seek to have contact with all of them, and to try and push one away is going to leave you incomplete and therefore spiritually unhealthy, right? The second principle is this principle of balance, that just because you have to have all the fundamental forces within you doesn't mean that you have to have them all in equal portion. There has a balance point between all of them that is right for you, and that what's right for you changes from moment to moment, and what's right for one person will not be right for another person. But finding the balance and maintaining the balance and being able to hit that moving target is one of the processes of creating spiritual wellness. The third principle is the principle of flow. This is incredibly important with food, right? Because food has to go in the body and then it has to come out of the body. And then also things come into our lives, we transform them, we are transformed by them, and then those things move on. And some of those things will be with us for a very long time and some of them will be for a very short time, but there has to be a flow to things in order for stuff to remain healthy, right? The other thing that I want to emphasize is that I am not trying to suggest that when you eat something, you should include it in every single meal for the rest of forever. What you should do is eat one serving or one meal's worth of the magical food in order to cause a change in the world around you, or in order basically to give yourself the nutrients that you need to make the change that you want to make, right? So I'll get into tools of how to ritualize a meal in a different presentation if people want to hear me ramble about that. But please try to think about all my suggestions as single ritual meals that are spells, instead of thinking of them as ongoing dietary changes. If you want to discuss dietary changes, again, please go talk to a licensed medical professional. So let's break down some of the different forces and fundamental force models that I work with in my cooking. The first is the 4 elements, right? And for me, the 4 elements show up predominantly in the basic ideas of the kitchen. Earth is the food, fire is the stove, water is water, and air is all the tools I use to try and get things to work, right? So air is in my whisk, is in my knife, is in my wooden spoon, is in my spatula. So to me, like, that's how the four elements show up. And similarly, the four elements show up in the body, right? Air is the breath, water is the blood, earth is like, the rest of your body. And fire is like the animating force, right? Like the bioelectricity that kind of runs everything behind the scenes, as well as like your consciousness. The other set of forces that I'm kind of starting to work with are the 7 classical planets, which are the Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. I'm going to be honest, I'm still kind of exploring how these things play into the cooking that I do, and I've only recently really gotten into the concept of like astrology as a magical tool, but I want to be honest that that is something that's going to come up in this talk because it is part of like how I'm starting to see the world. I also want to be really honest that one of my suspicions and one of my concerns about this is that I think the idea of tying particular planets to particular food might only be found in Vedic astrology, and that in Eurocentric and Mediterranean forms of astrology, it's more about medicinal herbs and less about medicinal foods. So with that out of the way, as something that is like a growing edge and a concern for me, the last sort of fundamental forces that I think about when I'm thinking about food are food groups. I'm going to be honest though, my spiritual food groups do not line up with the physical food groups. I think there's a lot of politics in the physical food groups, and I think there's some fat phobia in the physical food group like pyramids that we have. Like, I don't know why dairy isn't just part of like the protein category, which I think is weird. I also don't understand why nuts and legumes aren't in the protein category. That also seems weird to me. Yeah, like I have yet to see a food pyramid when I don't have questions. And I also think the idea of a food pyramid trying to tell you roughly how much you should eat is really weird, because the amount that you should eat is so different from person to person based on like age, where you live, what do you do for work, blah, 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 blah. Like, it's just like ridiculous to try and tell people how much to eat. But I do think about food groups loosely as spiritual forces in my cooking. So let's get on to my spiritual food groups. The first is water. I think dehydration is like pretty easy to like figure out as is overhydration, right? Like if your pee is clear, you're drinking too much. If your pee is real dark yellow, you're not drinking enough. Blah, 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 blah. But I think that there are spiritual signs of not having enough of the principle of water in your body. And I think that that has a lot to do with how we give and receive love. People I know who don't drink a lot of water, who seem like to be constantly kind of a little dehydrated, I've seen those people have like a little bit of a problem with like giving love to others around them, and also kind of to like valuing the love that they receive, right? So one of the things that I do with myself as a person who sometimes has dismissive avoidant attachment patterns is when I'm scared of the love that I'm receiving, I will sit down and do something that I call like the loving cup. And yes, I recognize that term is loaded. I didn't come up with it. I came up with it before I realized where it came from. It probably just like floated around in my subconscious. But what I do is like in a ritual space, I will take a cup of water, run my finger clockwise around the rim of the glass, think about all the love I've been shown recently, and then very slowly sip the water and try to feel myself taking in that love while giving space to the fact that like people loving me scares me. Right? So like this is an example of like water as a spiritual food. The next spiritual food group that to me is really important is leafy greens. I associate leafy greens a lot with financial health because I associate them with dietary fiber. And to me, if you're not getting enough fiber in your diet, or you're getting too much of it, and like your like physical waste, right, your poo is like not healthy, I think that tends to show up sometimes as like issues in your monetary flow. So if I see somebody, and I think it makes sense too, right, because when you run out of money, what's the first thing that you cut out of your diet, right? Like you can't afford fresh spinach when you don't have a lot of cash. So like getting those leafy greens in is, I think, really important for physical and spiritual survival, but it's also really hard to get a hold of when you don't have cash, or when you live in a food desert, which is a sign of like institutional poverty, or like institutional ways that poverty and artificial scarcity are created. So one of the things that I have seen is like, I have seen a lot of people who don't eat enough leafy greens, and my experience of these people and experiences of time of myself when I haven't eaten enough leafy greens in my diet, is that I didn't value the money coming into my life, and I didn't know what to do with it to build stability and wealth for myself. And I've kind of seen that be a pattern, but I've also seen, kind of seen people who eat nothing but salads to the detriment of like other food groups have plenty of really healthy money flow, right amounts coming in, right amounts going out, but they weren't really able to live life with gusto. So to me, there's like a slight Saturnian vibe to leafy greens of like, on the one hand, there's that very steady Saturn rhythm of like one piece at a time, one day at a time. But on the other hand, there's also this other Saturnian edge of like, if all you eat is salads, like, are you really living life to the fullest, right? So the next spiritual food group is proteins. Proteins for me are about rebuilding the physical body, and they're about grounding, right? And when I say proteins, I want you to think in a very broad and vegan friendly manner. Like, yes, I do mean like animal milk and animal protein, but I also mean like nut milk, nuts, mushrooms, beans, soybean products, like all these different ways that we think about protein. Like, I really want to emphasize that I mean a broad spectrum of proteins. So proteins to me are definitively about presence. They build the body, and by building the body, they pull us back into the body. So I've seen a lot of people after they are in oracular states or very deeply altered states of consciousness, use proteins as a way of like pulling themselves back. So I've seen a lot of people do this with like hard-boiled eggs or egg salad. I've seen people do this with like milks, be they animal or nut milk, and beans, right? So for me, it's really about presence, and it's really about like being present in the moment and in physical shared reality. The next food group I want to go over is starches, both whole grains and simple grains. I think whole and simple grain foods to me are definitely about energy. I don't think that I have met anyone who hasn't had enough starches in their life, but I've definitely seen people who eat starches because they're really easy to eat and really cozy. And so to me, I think of a lot of starches as comfort foods. I will say that like whole grains seem to have some of the same Saturnian balancing qualities of like leafy greens because of the dietary fibers, but also like they just, how do I phrase this? Like when you take away the whole grain and you just have like bleached flour and white bread and like white rice and all of that, and like only russet potatoes, missing out the entire giant pile of potatoes you could be eating. I get people who are like just kind of constantly reaching for comfort, either because they can't afford things beyond that, which is absolutely not their fault. Like, people are not poor because of their fault. People are poor because there's structural issues in reality, as human society. Like, well, except for that one guy, but there's always that one guy, right? So I think that starches are a lot about comfort. I think starches are a lot about like easy gifts. I think that's especially true for simple starches or starches that have been processed. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, right? Like when I have a bad day and I need to eat something and I need to just feel better fast, I am not above getting like a medium fry from your local like trashy burger joint and like some lemonade and sitting in my car and letting myself eat my feelings in the form of a medium fry. Like, I'm not above that, and I don't think we should shame people for that. But that seems to be the spiritual role that starches play, especially in my own cooking. The last group that I think this is, nope, the second to last group I want to go over is sugars, which I break up into unprocessed sugars, like fruits mostly, and processed sugars, so like candy, basically. High fructose corn syrup and white sugar falling into the latter category. I mean, also molasses and brown sugar, let's be honest. But with fruit sugars, I see a lot of gifting. I also see fruits as being gifts that we give to deities, gifts that we give to each other. Oranges on Christmas, you know, blackberries and raspberries are very important ritual gifts in my practice. And I do think of them as being gifts, right? Like, this is a celebration. This is a celebration food. Processed sugar for me, I associate with having way too much work to do and being too tired to do it. So I think of it legitimately as like a very mercurial brain boost of like, I have to get this list into the computer today or I'm going to miss a deadline and I really need this done like yesterday. So for me, like processed sugar is definitely way, way different than like unprocessed sugar. And I think it's been stripped of a lot of its celebration elements. And instead that like the thing of celebration that's really cool, which is a little bit of an energy boost and a brain blast and some creativity, kind of gets like manufactured down to like the worst of itself. Like, I associate Hershey's chocolate bars with being really sad on Tuesday, but I associate like oranges with hiking, right? Like going out and hiking on the weekends because I'm lucky enough to do that. So that's sugars. And then the actual last category I want to talk about is oils. And I cannot think about how to explain oils without thinking about Jupiter. Like every oils to me perfectly encapsulate what it is to be Jupiterian in like the food groups. Like it makes food feel more filling. It aids in the absorption of vitamins. It fills your stomach with a sense of joy and satisfaction around the exact same kinds of foods. Salads without olive oil or any kind of oil-based dressing is just kind of sad. Bacon grease. Oh, leafy greens and bacon grease. How I missed that. But yeah, to me, there's no better way to describe oils than they're just very jovial. And so, like, I have never met anyone who didn't have enough oil because I hang around predominantly with white middle class Americans. But yeah, so oils, and then also like I have definitely seen people eat the wrong kind of oils though, so definitely sometimes I have to shift my own oils and I have to be like, put down the canola oil, stop trying to like saute everything really fast on a high heat, grab some olive oil and like slow down. So there's that. So now that I've kind of given like a really fast description of like fundamental forces and the three principles, I really want to take time to slow down and go through a spell building example, right? So I sat down and I wrote out what I think are like the 6 most common spell goals that I have seen in spell work, right? Health, wealth, and love are the 3 things that we want. Protection helps us keep the things that we have. Wisdom permits us to keep perspective on what we have, what we don't have, what is good, what is bad, how should we be thinking about things, and then presence permits us to enjoy the stuff that's in front of us, right? So what I did was I rolled 1d6 to randomly select one of them, and the number 3 came up, so we're going to talk about love. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. You can do love spells for forms of love that are not romantic or sexual, right? Like if you want to do spells for platonic love, for self-love, for familial love, for more forms of love than I have time to list, by all means, like you can do that. But being that I'm trying to pick an example of a common kind of spell, and the most common kind of spell is like romantic and or sexual affection, that's what I am going to be covering in this example, right? So the traditional way to do this, and I have to say that I absolutely do not recommend doing this because it is completely unsanitary and ethically dubious, is you grab an aphrodisiac like a bottle of wine or some oysters. And then what you do is you find a way to like mingle it with your own essence. And the most traditional way to do this is to either add some of your, how should I put this, adult fun time bodily fluids or some of the hair that protects what I will loosely call your most private parts, right? The parts that we definitely do not show in public. Comma, dang it. That being said, please don't do this. Please, 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 please do not do this. It's deeply unsanitary. It's not a good idea. I'm sure it made sense at the time that it was being done, and I am sure that in contexts that are not the context that I live in this day, maybe it makes sense, but like, if you are also living in a predominantly white, predominantly American context, like, there's no reason, because I'm about to go over other options, but I felt like if we're gonna do this, we have to talk about the history, right? So the first thing that I say is that getting a date, whether you're more leaning towards the romantic, the sexual, or both in equal portion, is about flow most of the time. Like there is a process to getting a date that's pretty tried and true, right? Decide you want a date, Go looking in the right places, approach multiple people, like take people on coffee dates to see if you have chemistry, and then follow up with more elaborate dates with people you have chemistry on. You know, basically you assume there's someone in your near vicinity who would like to date you. Make sure that you know how to show off your best face, and then go out and find that person, right? So some people get tripped up on, do you want to date? Like, I've seen people dealing with comp het both because they are looking for the wrong gender or because they think that they should have romantic and sexual attraction for people and they just don't, like ace and arrow people. And I have seen you struggle with this a little bit. It's real. Do you know like who to look for or where to look is an issue? Because I've seen people go and try to date people they have nothing in common with, and it's like, bro, how are you going to hold a conversation with this person for 3 hours? Like, I know you think they're cute, but they're clearly not going to enjoy their time with you, and you're not going to enjoy your time with them. Like, let it go, right? Do you have basic date skills? Like, neurotypicals. Do you know how to talk to a neurodivergent person for more than an hour without becoming overly irritated or like misunderstanding what they're doing? Right? Like, do you understand the like info dumping as a form of affection? Do you understand like, hey, I found a shiny rock, I want to show it to you as a sign of affection? But also like, you know, basic self-care stuff. Like, are you able to shower 24 hours before the date or like clean yourself up somehow? Are you able to like wear clothing that's been laundered recently and that you haven't worn since you laundered it, kind of deal? Do you approach people that are a good idea to approach? And do you follow up? Like, if you're like, hey, do you want to get coffee on Saturday? And then they're like, I can't make Saturday. Do you follow that up with, I'm free on Wednesday, right? So these are like the flow issues. But instead of getting into the nitty gritty of all the different things I know about getting dates, because I am not good at long-term relationships, but I am very good at dates. I could definitely get a date. Let's look at the 3 most common issues I've seen people have with dating. This is mostly advice from my college days, so this might not apply to you if you're over the age of 30. But let's look at my most common college age issues I've seen with dating. The first is people looking in the wrong places. Like, if you don't know where to look to like ask people if they want to date you, what I would make for you is a carrot and cumin soup with bay leaf and a homemade fish stock using the head of the fish. If you can eat the fish eyeball, that's definitely a bonus because all of these are foods that are said to help the eyesight. And if we help the physical eyesight, maybe we will help the spiritual eyesight as well. And because carrots have a very strong taproot, hopefully that will give you a sense of proper direction towards like people who are going to actually enjoy their time with you so you can have fun on your date. A small note about fish eyeballs. Fish eyeballs are considered a delicacy in many cultures, and I recognize that like if you're having difficulty eating fish eyeballs, it's definitely a cultural difference. It's not because there's anything gross about fish eyeballs. That being said, I too have difficulty eating things that go against my cultural food taboos. So that's why I say if you can eat the eyeball, it's probably bonus points. So that's what I would make for someone who like that's their predominant issue with finding a date is they're just looking in all the wrong places. This is also just good for people who like need a little bit of wisdom or like sight is like carrot, cumin soup, fish stock helps. Bay leaf, don't forget the bay leaf. There's a lot of people, like the other thing I see is people who definitely want to date and they definitely look in the right place, but they don't go up and say, hi, I think you're cute, or like, hi, what's this thing you're doing? Like, I really enjoy your shirt. Like, I really like your hat. You know, I really thought the thing you said in class today was really smart. I wanted to ask you about it, right? And then to follow up with, you know, I find you attractive. Would you like to go for a coffee sometime so we can see if we enjoy each other's company? And for me, like, the easiest way to overcome fear is eat something really spicy, because if you can shove like a really spicy pepper in your mouth and tolerate the pain of the pepper and learn to enjoy it, you can then hopefully also learn to enjoy the sense of like, not anxiety, but what's the word I'm looking for? Apprehension? No. You know that feeling when you're going at the top of a front end of a roller coaster and you hear like the click, 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 click? It's that feeling. I just can't remember the word for it. But if you learn to appreciate that feeling and you learn to appreciate that spicy can also be pleasurable, hopefully you will also gain the courage to walk up and be like, hello, I think you are cute. Would you like to go get coffee and see if we enjoy each other's company? No problem with saying no, low stakes, right? The last real big problem I have seen is people who get fixated on people that they've turned them down or who obviously have no interest in them. I think this is the trickiest one to kind of deal with because it's usually not about dating problems. It's usually about personal problems, insecurity, blocked grief, fear of rejection, right? Like not feeling confident in themselves. When I feel these ways, not that this has ever kept me from getting a date because I don't know what's good for me, but when I feel these ways in life, I go and have rice and beans because that's grandma love food, but also like brown rice and black bean soup, like helps for some reason to clear the grief channel and just lets me finally have my cry. Like, I don't know why, but I have this perpetual homesickness even when I'm in my own house sometimes. And so for some reason, rice and beans just like takes me back to a sense of being truly at home and helps me really feel like I'm at home when I'm in my own house. So that's my I have to have a cry food. And that's what I would recommend for somebody who is like fixated on someone they can't date. Like, get you some regular grandma food, have a cry, recognize that you can't get them, reevaluate, not can't get, you don't really acquire somebody, realize they don't want to hang out with you, and like address the deeper issue for your fixation. Like, love yourself, you know? So that's like a loose overview of like the fundamental principles that I use when thinking about foods to feed people or feed myself for like nutritioning, what's the word I'm looking for? Anyway, nutrition to get through life's spiritual issues through ritual meals, right? Thank you all for hanging out. Thanks to Google Slides for giving me the theme for this thing. And also thanks to rawpixel.com for giving me a bunch of public domain images so that it wouldn't just me to be talking for like half an hour. See you in the next one.